Do we have an understanding of what choice the president has made here? We know he made one, but what is it?
We know he's made a choice so far. We don't know exactly what that choice is. And as you point out, Kailey, I mean, he's in a tough spot right now. Many of the president's speeches over the last couple of months have been interrupted by anti-war activists as well within his own, presumably within his own party. And on the other side of the aisle, as you mentioned, you've got some of the more hawkish traditional Republicans, Lindsey Graham, Tom Cotton, and others calling for direct strikes in Iran. I mean, even that type of rhetoric, you could see the president, even as he weighs this decision making, the company line or the White House line from both he and Kirby is that we don't want a wider conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah, criticism from Republicans, largely on Capitol Hill, has been clearly knocking around in his head. We heard from the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. Mike Rogers says Biden's fear of escalation has morphed into a doctrine of appeasement. That is not a narrative you want to go into an election with.
And to your point, Joe, that's exactly the conundrum, right? Because all of this is happening with the backdrop of the 2024 election. So for President Biden, of course, he wants to defend the nation. But there's also, again, the prospect of getting entangled in a wider war that's not politically popular with his party as well. And we're 10 months out into the election.
Well, and to that point, something we have heard in regard to the other active conflict the president is very much focused on, the war in Ukraine, is that he should be paying more attention to the U.S.'s borders than to other countries' borders, given the crisis we are seeing there. And, of course, he is at the table now trying to negotiate a deal with members of the Senate. Is there a feeling, though, at the White House that this is actually going to go anywhere, that he's going to be able to use that pen, sign some legislation into law?
The White House is pushing for it, right? You can see the change in the rhetoric over the last week or so, what he's been able to compromise on or appease some of the Republicans. But we're in this bizarro world of 2024 electoral politics where his main nemesis, Donald Trump, wants to run on the border and is pressuring members of Congress of his own party to not accept a deal. And how many times have we seen his party buck former President Trump?
It's kind of amazing that we're still talking about this border deal without seeing text, and everyone seems to have a pretty strong opinion about it. We heard from Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York, from the leadership in the House on the border earlier. Here she is.
Border security is the most fundamental responsibility of a nation, and House Republicans are serving as the last line of defense to secure our border. As we speak, House Republicans on the Homeland Security Committee are marking up the long overdue articles of impeachment against Alejandro Mayorkas, holding him accountable for his breach of the public trust and willful refusal to enforce our laws.
Julie, fine, there's a lot here as we consider the debate over a possible border deal, knowing that the Homeland Security Secretary actually has a seat at that table, depending on the session, with the three senators who are involved here. The message from Donald Trump, though, is we don't even need a bill. Is all of this in vain the closer they get to the finish line?
Well, I mean, if the former president is saying we don't even need a bill, and he speaks frequently to the House Speaker, I mean, that's basically his way of saying don't solve this right now. I mean, it is an election year. However, Republicans do have this responsibility, since they've been saying we need to do something about the border, to accept something about the border. So it will really be up to each member what they decide to do in this situation. But it will be very interesting in the next few days to finally see what the text is, to see what they have actually been working on together.
Well, of course, there's many sides to this story, including Democrats who seem more willing to actually vote on potentially a piece of border legislation if it is indeed brought to the floor, but also have been more vocal coming out against the current efforts underway in the House to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. Here is House Democratic Caucus Chair Pete Aguilar earlier today.
We should talk about what we stand for, what we believe, what will meaningfully help and improve the border. But that is completely different than sham impeachments. Again, this is done just from a political standpoint because Republicans don't have any solutions. House Republicans are paralyzed. They don't support bipartisan reform that's happening in the Senate. So this is the only thing that they can hang their hat on.
Mario, when it comes to the impeachment of a member of the cabinet, something we haven't seen in what, Joe, over 100 years, I believe? 150
yes,
years. Why would the Biden administration not just potentially ask him to resign if he is a distraction to actually trying to get this legislative work done?
Well, at this point, and you saw some of the House Democrats rallying around him as well, Benny Thompson saying that Mayorkas's behavior doesn't meet the bar for high crimes and misdemeanors, et cetera. I mean, at this point, everyone's trying to score political points, right? To ask your Homeland Security chief to step down is essentially a concession to Republicans. Republicans also know that this isn't going to go anywhere in the Senate, right? The impeachment may take hold in the House. It's not going to go anywhere in the Senate, but it does at least weaken the president, again, in an election year.
Sounds like a lot of messaging around here to me. Julie Fine, is Donald Trump going to make the final decision on whether a border bill sees the light of day?
Well, I think he's going to make his feelings on this known. It's a question of whether Republicans then decide to follow what he wants to say. Again, I'm very struck when I recently heard the House Speaker say they speak almost daily. So I think this is going to be a question of, do Republicans choose to fall in line with what the former president wants in an election year? I mean, I cannot stress this enough. This has become such a large issue for voters.
Well, speaking of it being an election year, Julie, of course, we are still in primary season. You, in fact, tonight are joining us from Las Vegas, Nevada, where there is a primary and a caucus coming up. We all have our eyes on South Carolina, but Nevada actually is a contest sooner than that. Can you just explain to us what's going to happen there over the course of the next week?
Well, it will be very interesting because actually there's a primary and a caucus. The state instituted a primary system here, but the Republicans sued, and now there's going to be a caucus as well. Republican candidates cannot run in both, and all of the delegates come from the caucus. Well, Nikki Haley, she's in the primary. The former president, Donald Trump, he is in the caucus, so he obviously likely to take away the lion's share of delegates. The former president and Democrats are in the primary. So I expect next week to be some confusion from voters who know there's a primary and a caucus and can't figure out who's on which ballot. So that's certainly a first here in Nevada, a state that's extremely important. However, we're here talking to people on the ground. We're talking to party chairs. Basically, everybody really looking forward to November, because here in Nevada, you not only have the presidential race, which, as you remember, in 2020 was extremely important and took several days in order for there to be an announcement on who actually won the state. Yeah. We've also got a very important Senate race as well. Expect a lot of money to be spent here in Nevada.